Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we are diving into something absolutely wild, a gripping mystery that connects a millennia-old epic with modern-day sightings. We're talking about the legend of Ashwatthama, a figure from the ancient Indian epic, the Mahabharata. His story is so potent, so terrifying, and so deeply embedded in cultural memory that people genuinely believe he is still walking among us right now.
Just think about the sheer scale of this for a second. We're talking about a 5,000-year-old warrior supposedly still roaming the earth. We have reports spanning hundreds of years, describing a man roughly 12 feet tall, wandering deep inside Indian jungles. He's reportedly covered in flies, carrying a horrific, constantly bleeding, dented wound right in the middle of his forehead. This isn't just some forgotten ghost story, you know? It's a living legend that keeps generating eyewitness accounts. But to figure out who this towering wanderer actually is, we have to trace the breadcrumbs back through time.
And when you look at that historical timeline, a pretty bizarre pattern emerges. Back in 1192, after losing a battle, King Prithviraj Chauhan retreated to the jungle and reportedly ran into an old man with a massive head scar. The king was actually a skilled doctor and tried to heal the wound for a week, but it just wouldn't close, which prompted the old man to finally reveal his ancient identity. Fast forward to the 14th century, Saint Naranapa claimed this very same figure helped him write the Kannada version of the Mahabharata. Then, in 1912, a revered saint named Vasudevananda Saraswati was guided out of a dense forest by a towering man who explicitly told him he was from the Dwapara Yuga, an era thousands of years in the past. And get this, right up in 1968, a well-known doctor, Avijah in Ludhiana, Punjab, reported being visited by a massive man speaking ancient dialects with piercing blue eyes and a literal hollowed-out cavity in his skull.
So what exactly is going on here? Well, to understand these consistent, crazy sightings, we have to talk about what a Chiranjeevi is. In Hindu theology, a Chiranjeevi is a being destined to live through the ages, specifically right up until the end of our current epoch, the Kali Yuga. Now for some, this immortality was a divine blessing, but for the man we're talking about, it was the ultimate, inescapable punishment. And that brings us to the ancient legend of Ashwatthama.
All right, let's kick things off with part 1, the birth of a warrior.
To really grasp this origin story, we have to jump way back to the Dwapara Yuga. This was an era defined by great kings, powerful sages, and catastrophic cosmic warfare. Ashwatthama was the only son of the great royal teacher, Dronacharya, and his wife Kripi. The legend says that the moment he was born, he let out a cry that sounded exactly like the neighing of a powerful horse, which is how he got the name Ashwatthama. But here's the real kicker. He wasn't born like a normal child. He came into the world with a mani, a glowing, divine gem, literally embedded right into his forehead.
Growing up, his life was this wild mix of extremes. On one hand, his mortal reality was incredibly grim. His family struggled with absolute, grinding poverty. His father was deeply humiliated that he couldn't even afford milk for his son. But on the other hand, he walked around with divine invincibility. That gem wasn't just for show. It gave him complete immunity to fatigue, hunger, disease, and conventional weapons.
I mean, this gem was the ultimate shield. Ancient texts tell us that because of the mani, Ashwatthama literally had no fear of the gods or terrifying demons known as Danavas, or even the giant divine serpents called Nagas. He was absolutely untouchable. And this massive advantage set him up to become one of the most terrifying, capable commanders in the epic Kurukshetra war, fighting alongside the Kauravas against the Pandavas.
Which brings us to part 2, deception at Kurukshetra.
Now, every unstoppable force eventually hits a wall, right? In the heat of the massive 18-day Kurukshetra war, the Pandavas realized that as long as Ashwatthama's father, Dronacharya, kept fighting, they were going to lose. So to defeat him, ShriKrishna orchestrated this brilliant, if morally questionable, 3-step trick. First, the Pandavas found an elephant in their own army and named it Ashwatthama. Second, they killed that elephant. And third, Yudhishthira, a king famously known for absolutely never telling a lie, shouted out across the battlefield, "Ashwatthama is dead," but then quickly whispered the second half, "Whether man or elephant, I do not know."
In all the deafening chaos of the war, Dronacharya only heard that first part. Believing his invincible son was actually dead, he was just overcome with grief, dropped his weapons, and was swiftly beheaded. Well, when Ashwatthama found out his father was killed through a cheap trick, he completely lost it. He flew into a blind, uncontrollable rage. He tossed aside all the righteous rules of war, snuck into the Pandava camp dead in the night and committed an absolute massacre. He murdered the sleeping commander Drishtadyumna and, horrifically, the 5 sleeping sons of Queen Draupadi.
Obviously, when the Pandavas discovered the slaughter of their children, they hunted him down. They finally cornered him on the banks of the river Ganga. Terrified and desperate, Ashwatthama committed his ultimate sin. He summoned the Brahmashira, this terrifying weapon of mass destruction, powered by mantras, basically capable of destroying the universe. Arjuna countered with his own weapon, but as these two forces were about to collide, the great sages stepped in. Arjuna managed to withdraw his weapon. Ashwatthama, though, he didn't know how. So out of pure spite, he directed this catastrophic energy straight into the womb of Uttara, specifically targeting the unborn heir of the Pandavas, Parikshit.
And that unforgivable act leads us right to part 3, the ultimate curse.
Targeting an unborn child was considered an unspeakable crime, a total breach of all cosmic laws. Sri Krishna used his divine power to revive the stillborn baby, but then he turned his absolute wrath onto Ashwatthama. The punishment was brutal and it was permanent. First, Arjuna physically gouged that protective divine gem right out of Ashwatthama's forehead, leaving a massive, gaping wound. Then, Krishna laid down the curse. Ashwatthama would never be granted the peace of death. Instead, he was condemned to wander the earth for thousands of years. That empty socket on his head would never heal. It would constantly ooze blood and foul-smelling pus, attracting insects. Stripped of his invincibility, he was banished from human society forever, forced to suffer in total isolation.
And here is where it all comes full circle. The truly terrifying part of this ancient curse is how flawlessly it matches up with those modern sightings we talked about earlier. The specifics of Krishna's curse, the towering height, the unhealing bleeding wound, the endless wandering in the jungles, they are literally the exact same details reported by the king in 1192, the saint in the 14th century, and that doctor in 1968.
The myth is so deeply ingrained in the local culture that at the Asargard fort in India, locals fiercely believe Ashwatthama is a daily regular. They claim that every single morning, before anyone else even gets there, this immortal wanderer places a single, fresh red rose at the Shiva temple on the fort's peak. The conviction that he is still out there, hiding in the shadows, is just palpable.
So how does a story this old stay so incredibly vivid today? That's part 4, keeping the myth alive.
It survives through some truly brilliant cultural preservation. And a huge turning point for this was the year 1967. That's when Anand Pai founded Amar Chitrakatha, an Indian comic book publisher that took on the massive job of translating complex mythology into super engaging visual stories for kids and adults.
And to put that effort into perspective, we are talking about over 100 million copies of these comics sold worldwide. 100 million! They took these dense, ancient verses from the Mahabharata and turned them into dynamic, unforgettable visuals.
Plus, they translated these stories into 38 different languages. So, because of these accessible comic panels, you've got entirely new generations all over the globe growing up and visualizing Ashwatthama's tragic fall in the exact same vivid colors.
It's a massive leap. We've evolved from ancient sages reciting verses around fires in the forest, all the way to modern families downloading digital lifetime subscriptions of the Mahabharata. You can literally buy premium 42-book box sets today. Ashwatthama's curse is sitting right there on modern living room bookshelves, keeping his memory totally alive. And it's not just books, either. The lore is firmly extending into physical spaces. You've got companies like Artarium making these incredibly detailed, high-end statues and figurines of these epic warriors. Whether it's a piece for your car dashboard or an intricate statue for an office desk, these are physical, tangible reminders of ancient lore. We're basically surrounding ourselves with the Dwapara Yuga.
Which kind of leaves us with this mind-bending paradox to think about, right? The ancient texts say Ashwatthama was cursed to be immortal, doomed to wander the earth alone until the end of time. But honestly, as long as we keep buying the books, passing down the comics, buying the statues, and telling the stories of the giant man with the bleeding forehead, aren't we the ones making Ashwatthama immortal? Thanks for joining me on this explainer today. Keep asking questions, and I'll catch you in the next one.